some degree. We'll be spending most of our time in one part of the Bible at the end of the book of John. But before that, I just wanted to ask a quick question. And I like to have interaction in class. Class is one of the few times where we get to kind of go back and forth and learn about God's Word together, to discuss it, to maybe clear up the air. If you have things that maybe you don't quite understand or it doesn't quite make sense, ask the question. Let me try to help answer that for you, rather than me just keep spewing on words and leave you somewhere where you're not sure what I'm trying to get at. All right, let's see. Does that work now? Is that too loud? I can put it way down here. I'm going to do my best not to look down, because it's going to get loud if I do. All right, well, as he said, my name is Jacob Sarlos. My wife, Janine, and Oliver are here with us. We currently live in Searcy, where a lot of my wife's family are. Some of you may have known of me before this, because I actually worked down in Texas in Wharton. I was the associate minister where Luke and Shelley Guthrie were preaching, the son of Mark. And I'm sorry, Mark, I forgot your wife's name. Connie. Yes. Mark and Connie Guthrie. I'm horrible with names. I'm great with faces. If I see you in a crowd, I will recognize you, but it takes me a while to get names a lot of times. So I will apologize for that if I forget any names you've already told me. But we had a wonderful time working with them down there, and they hold a close place in our heart. And so knowing them and them saying, hey, Broken Bow is a great place, you should call them, you should talk to them, that's always a good way to know that this is a great place to be when you know somebody who knows the people here already. And I'll be honest, you guys have quite a good reputation. There's a lot of people outside of this area, even friends we have where we preached in Glenwood, that come over here and have told us good things about Broken Bow. Every time we talk about this congregation, it's always been good replies hearing back as far as who you are and the way you live your lives. And so that's always a wonderful thing to hear, and I tell you that because I want you to know you are doing great work here. With or without the full-time preacher or anything like that, you guys are wonderful, and I just thank you so much, and I know God appreciates the lives that you live. This morning, we're going to kind of start at the end of something, and that's kind of the question I have for you today. Have you ever started at the end of something rather than the beginning? If you have, tell me what it was. I'm curious. End of a book. I think that's probably one of the more common things. I know I've done that. I know sometimes I had to do that in different times in school, in different college times that I've had. You get a book you've got to read, and sometimes you don't have a lot of time to read it, and so you kind of need to have an idea of where that book is going, and you might look at the back of the book before you ever look at the front of it. I definitely understand that for sure. Any other times that maybe you start at the end of something rather than the beginning? Yes, sir.
When I was a kid, you go deer hunting.
Okay.
The older guy kills a deer, you have to drag it and have to cut it.
So,
Instead of getting
oh, so you had to do the hard part, not the fun part. You were kind of forced to do the end instead of doing the beginning. Okay. That's the first time I've ever heard that one. That's for sure. Anybody else?
Writing a paper, write the conclusion first, and then come back and do introduction.
Oh yeah, that's probably one of the more common things that you'll have to do. I know one of the things they teach you as a preacher a lot of times is you need to write your conclusion because you need to know where you're going and what the final message is that you're trying to teach people before you write anything else down, because otherwise you're never going to know how what you're working on is going to end. You know, it might completely change while you're writing through your sermon or your lesson. You need to know where you're going and what your plan is. So starting at the end, that's definitely a good thing there. I know I'm not going to say for all of us men, but us have jumped ahead when we build something and maybe build something without looking at instructions and maybe do something ahead of time that we weren't supposed to do. And sometimes have to take things back apart because they don't go together once you jump too many steps ahead because we don't like to look. I know I'm fall in that category once in a while. Usually my wife will straighten me out, but I try to get it right the first time. What can you do? Anything else? This morning we're going to start at the end of the book rather than at the beginning, and there's a reason to it. One of the wonderful things about the Bible is every once in a while you find books that actually tell you what the purpose of the book is. They tell you what the plan is or what they want you to learn. Just like a sermon conclusion or a paper conclusion, they give you an idea of this was the whole point of everything that was written before is right here. And sometimes when it does that, especially at the end of the book, it's not a bad thing to go and look at what that was because it can help you better understand everything that's written before it, everything that's coming before that message. And so we're going to look at the book of John, chapter 20, almost the end of the book. John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. It says, therefore many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe in Jesus, and that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may also have life in his name. That is what some would call the purpose statement of the book. The whole reason that John wrote this book is so that people will actually believe in Jesus. So they will understand who he is and all the things that he did. And all the things that he did had witnesses to him. And those witnesses are giving their account. And that's what you see happen starting in the book of Acts. You start seeing the apostles and other disciples start giving their account of everything Jesus has done in his life and trying to help others believe that. But the book continues after that with a conversation that happens between Jesus and his disciples, and a little bit of focus on Peter as well. And we might get into this a little bit in our sermon today, but this morning I want to focus on one aspect of this conversation. Starting in chapter 21, starting at verse 12, it says, Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you, knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and fish likewise. This is now the third time Jesus was manifested to the disciples, and he was raised from the dead. And then after that, in verse 15, it says, so when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? I want to ask you, what are the these he's talking about here? If you look at what it's reading contextually, what we just read, what are the these he's talking about? Do you love me more than these? Bread and fish. No, that's exactly right. Bread and fish. Do you love me more than the food I just gave you? We just had breakfast. Do you love me more than these? Bread and fish. How important is that? Do you love me more than the food that I give you? Why does he bring up this statement? What is so important? How does it connect to the rest of the book? Does anybody remember anything else that's happened with bread and fish throughout the book of John? Feeding of the 5,000? Told him he was the bread of life. Bread is a very big buzzword. I mean that by saying it's kind of a key word, a key thought that's going through. If you turn your Bible back to John chapter 6, where we see that feeding that was mentioned. We see in John chapter 6 where he feeds the 5,000. He feeds all the people. They have all the leftovers. Everybody's full. Everybody's been satisfied. And then you see the amazing moment where Jesus walks on the water and that whole scene that happens. And then they get to the other side of the lake. And guess who shows up? All the people show up. And what are they wanting again? They want the food. And so what you see Jesus say, when they ask him, they say, Rabbi, how'd you get here in verse 25 Jesus then said, truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs. Now remember what chapter 20 said? Everything was written, all the signs, and there was even more signs done so that they would believe. They weren't seeking him for the signs. Even there were all these amazing things he was doing. It says, but you seek me because you ate the loaves, the bread, and were filled. That word there in Greek, a really good translation for it would be satisfied. You were satisfied. You got what you wanted. You got all you think you needed. You got what you thought was the most important thing. And we have to understand that they are living in a very, very different culture than us today. We are very blessed. I would say that hardly any of us have ever had to go without a meal. I mean, maybe. Sometimes we might choose to skip a meal. But very few of us in the United States have to go without a meal. I'm not saying there aren't some that deal with that struggle and strife. There are. But very few of us are in the same kind of situation that they were back in these days. There were people that really had nothing. And those were the people who really sought out Jesus because they couldn't get the medical care they needed. They couldn't be healed of their infirmaries as they were dealing with. They needed help. And Jesus was helping them, but not only with the health struggles they had, but he was even giving them food. He was filling their bellies. They didn't have to go and work for it. They just had to follow him. And so they were being filled, they were being satisfied, but they were thinking of only the physical. They were completely missing the spiritual. And that's where the verse comes in here just a little farther down that was already mentioned by Connie. I am the bread of life. Even today, this morning, we partake of the Lord's Supper and we partake of the bread that represents his body. It's just bread, but we focus on the fact that there is a spiritual side of it. He is the bread of life. He is what truly satisfies. We don't seek the food that he can give. We know we are blessed by him. We know we are blessed in that we have more than we will ever need. We aren't going hungry. But are we only seeking Jesus for the blessings of the physical life, or do we actually see what's important that he's giving? The spiritual blessings, the fact that he is the life. He says, do you love me more than these at the end of the book? Talking about fish. Now, if you remember in right before that conversation starts, right at the beginning of chapter 21, Peter goes back to fishing. So that's a good part of the reason why he asked him that specific question as well. After everything he saw and all the things he did alongside of Jesus, watching him do these miracles, he's like, all right, guys, want to go see what we can catch today? I don't know what else to do. What's important to you? Jesus comes back to him and says, do you love me more than these? So why? Why is this question so important? Why is it so important that Jesus asks a question like this of one of his apostles? You would assume the apostles love him, right? They've been following him for years. Is this question just for him? Or maybe for all those who were there to hear and for all of us who are able to read today? How much do we love him? The amazing thing about the conversation, though, is it continues on, and he says, do not work for the, let me go back to chapter 21. I'm reading the wrong chapter here. In verse 15, he continues on after he says, do you love me more than these? He says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, tend my lambs. Now, if anybody has ever walked through this passage with you before, you'll probably already understand that a lot of times they'll point out the fact that there's two different Greek words for love here. We don't see it in our language. That's one of the blessings of the Greek language that we can look at today is that there's a lot of different words that mean different things, even though it means only one thing in our language. And that's the word love. There's 4 different Greek words for love. 2 of them are used mainly throughout the Bible, is phileo love, that's brotherly love, and then agape love. That's the kind of love that he wanted to do. He was willing to sacrifice himself because he loved us, just like God was willing to send his son because he loved us, that agape love. And so when Jesus asks Peter, he says, do you love me? He uses that word agape. Are you ready to sacrifice yourself and put me first? Do you love me? How do you think Peter answers? He answers with brotherly love. He says, you know that I love you. I love you like I love my brother. You are a brother to me. I care a lot about you, is what he's saying. That's not what he's asking. He says, if you really love me, tend my sheep. And he goes through this conversation, and he asks this question multiple times. And the one that really hits home is the very last time he asks the question. He says, Peter, do you even phileo love me? Do you really even love me like a brother? And Peter still answers, you know I love you like a brother. How important is this word love? How important does the Bible say love is? I heard a very... Yeah. Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, and the next following verse, or the next couple verses, says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. One version says with all your body, I believe, as well. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. For all the teachings of the law and the prophets ride on those 2 commandments, focused on one word, love. You know, probably one of the most famous people outside of Jesus or any kind of Christianity, I would potentially say, that had a very good handle on the kind of love that we should have in this world. If you ever go through and have time to read her quotes, is Mother Teresa. She has some of the best quotes on love and what love really is that go along with what Jesus teaches, probably more than just about anybody else you're going to find. Because she understands that the only way you win in the end, the only way that you will succeed in the end, that the world will ever get better, is if we love each other. Not hate each other, not go to war, not do this, not do that. It's love. It's caring about each other. That's what's important. And that's what Jesus teaches in the Bible. That's what the Bible teaches all the way through. What's the passage that says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, love never fails. Love is what's most important. And so that is even key, not just through the whole Bible, but even here in the book of John, at the end of the book of John, he's closing it, asking his disciples, do you really love me? I think it's a fair question when you think about the fact that they had just worked with him for the last 3 years or so of his ministry, and then they decide, I'm just going to go see how the fish are biting today. Maybe that'll be better. Do you love me? Are you going to tend my sheep? What kind of love do we have in our life today? What kind of love are we sharing with the world? What kind of love do we share back with Christ? His love hasn't changed. The fact is, he went to the cross for us. He died for us. He sacrificed himself, even though that's not what he wanted. I think we can easily prove that. He asked God that let that cup pass from him. But he said he was willing to say, but not my will, but yours be done. He didn't want to go through the pain and the suffering. But he loved us enough that he was willing to forego what he wanted to do what God had asked him to do. He loved us with that true agape love, that self-sacrificing love, that you are willing to make the choice to put others first. Say, this is the kind of love that we should have a lot more of in the world, even probably more than we realize. There's a lot of different types of love out there, but this is the kind of love that we should see between husbands and wives. You know, we live in a world today where, you know, you get into marriage with the understanding that there's always the option to get out. Is that really love? I mean, we have people who get in that are willing to just say, hey, if it doesn't work out in the next month or so, we'll just part ways, and this will just be our first trial. And, you know, 4 marriages deep, they're still swapping around because they haven't found the right person yet. Well, is the problem that they haven't found the right person, or is the problem that they don't have the willingness to commit to that one person, to have that kind of love that we're talking about here? This is the kind of love where you make the choice that, what do we say when we get married, for better or for worse a lot of times? I don't know. They may have taken that out of marriages now, out of the ceremonies. But for better or for worse, you make the choice to love them no matter what. You will sacrifice your own desires to help your partner, to help your spouse, to help them grow, to help them be nurtured, to help them be the best that they can be. And they are supposed to do likewise for you. So we should be seeing this kind of love more. And I can tell you right now, I definitely see this in the church more. It's a lot easier to see this love in the church because people tend to have a better understanding of the commitment that you're making, because you understand that that marriage and love is something that is a blessing from God. It's something that you are to hold on to. What God has joined together, let no man separate. You are one flesh. It's an understanding of what this self-sacrificing love and commitment is. It's a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, our world is changing and turning away from that kind of love. Honestly, there's a lot of hot-button topics we could even talk about this morning about how bad things are getting, the craziness that is going around the world. But again, it all needs to come back to love if we want things to get better. Because we can't go out there and attack people or hate on them just because we don't like their choices, or maybe they don't believe in God or believe in Jesus or anything like that. We have to love them and try to help teach them what is right. That is what Jesus is doing with his own disciples. He doesn't necessarily appreciate the choice they made to simply go back to fishing. That's not what he asked them to do. What was the great commission that he gave them right at the end of his life? Was it, hey, go cast that line one more time. Have a good weekend out on the lake. Don't worry about my work. What's he tell them in Matthew chapter 28? Go out into all the world and what? Fish? Preach the gospel. Fish for men. Fish for people. Fish for souls. Show them the love that I have shown you. Care about them in the way that I care about you, in the way that I care about all, that I was willing to die for you. He's trying to get this point across to them. So, when it comes to the choices that we make in life, we have a lot of choices we go through each and every day. Even choosing what to wear every morning is just one more thing. What to eat, what to do. Say, I'm honored at the fact that you chose to come and listen to me. For all of you who knew I was going to be here, if you didn't know I was going to be here, then thank you for not knowing and showing up anyway. But if you knew I was here and you were willing to come and listen to me, not knowing who I was, I appreciate that choice. But we have a lot of choices. The question is, what do you allow your choices to be? What drives the choices that you make? Do you allow your love for God, your love for Christ, to drive your decisions in this life? What kind of choices should we be making? Sometimes going to the end of the book can help us understand everything that started from the very beginning. Say, one of the reasons I love the book of John is because not only does it give us the reason the whole thing has been written, but it is one of the Gospels that goes all the way to the beginning. All of them give some kind of genealogy of Christ. But the book of John goes all the way to the beginning of all creation, of all time. He was always there. And there was always going to be a plan for him to come and live among us and to be willing to love us so much that he would go through everything that he did. And that was a choice that he made at the beginning of time, at the beginning of creation. He made that choice to live according to God's will. How do we allow our choices to guide us? What do we choose to do with our life each and every day? I'm not trying to tell you here this morning that we have to make giant sacrifices. You don't have to go be a martyr by any means, and I have no desire for you to be a martyr. We live in a wonderful world today where the worst we get at suffering is maybe ridicule or people who look down on us for what we believe because they think we might be traditional or old school, or some people might even want to call us bigots for what we believe because it doesn't agree with what they believe. Are you willing to go through that amount of suffering for God? To teach him? To still be able to use his name to talk about Jesus, to talk about all Jesus did each and every day with the people you are around? I mean, these are the kind of lessons that Jesus is trying to teach us, that he's trying to teach his own disciples even at the end of time for him on this earth. He says, do you love me, Peter? He says, you know I love you like a brother. That's why I went fishing. I need to catch my food for tomorrow. I need to catch food to live off of. I was focused on the physical once again, not focused on the spiritual needs of the people around us. I saw a kind of a funny picture, but it's a very true picture. The other day, it was a picture of a little girl that was just pointing at the screen, and above it says, "Don't worry. We're all going to live forever." And then underneath the picture it says, all you have to worry about is location, location, location. You know, in reality, I'm pretty sure that is the key, location, location, location. Well, what about our lives today? Do we think about that? We're all going to live forever. That is true. We have souls that are going to live on with God. But are you actually going to be with God? Or are you going to be forever separated from him? I hope and pray, and I'm going to assume today that all of us that are actually sitting in this room are living our lives to where we can be with God. But how many people do we know outside these doors that are not in that position? People that are family, people that are friends, people that are coworkers. Are we making the choices to care about their spiritual needs rather than our physical, maybe, ease of living around them? Because I know it's hard. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it's always easy to talk to somebody about Jesus, because they may not be your friend anymore after that. It's true. But if you're not willing to talk to them about Jesus, how do we know if anybody else ever will? So you don't have to convert anyone right on the spot. But sowing that seed shows you love enough to say something, to care about their soul, to care more about the physical things, or to care more about the spiritual things than the physical things. To not worry about how they're living their life right now, but worry about where their life is going to go in the end. Because it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what kind of background you have. It doesn't matter what kind of sin you lived in before you find Christ. Once you find Christ, that is all washed away. We live in a newness of life, it says. We live for him. We're no longer living for ourselves. So what kind of decisions are you going to make this week? What kind of choices are going to drive your life? What's maybe going to be the underlying theme that drives your life? I hope it's love, because there's nothing more important outside of Jesus and God himself than love, because that's what he says. All I ask you to do. This covers everything that was taught before. Love. Love God first. Love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. Make him your everything. And then love others like themselves. You know, one of the beautiful things about somewhat growing up in the church, I didn't start in the church when I was my son's age, but I started going to church when I was somewhat young, so I know a decent number of the kids' songs. And I don't think there's any more applicable, maybe more biblical song than the song, the joy song that we learn as kids, the one that teaches us basically everything the Bible wants us to know on how we should live our lives. And that's J-O-I, J-O-I. This is what it means. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. Isn't it amazing that a simple song like that can teach all of the laws and prophets just in those little verses? Everything that we need to know. Now, there's a lot of things that we can learn, and there's a lot of details, but overall, he says if you have love, if you put God first, if you put others second, and you don't make it about yourself, the choices you make are going to be great, and they're going to do great things. Now, we could look on, and that's what we're going to do a little bit later this morning, so I'm not going to dive too much into it, but I want you to think about what those choices mean and what happened. Jesus has these questions, and think about the fact that the other disciples are sitting here listening to Jesus question Peter's love. So they have to answer these questions inside their own hearts as well. But what did they go on to do? What did his apostles go on to do when Jesus finally ascended into heaven? They changed the world. The impact that Jesus and those 12 men had. 13 if you want to count Paul, when Paul came around to be one of the apostles. Changed the world as we know it. And left us with the greatest teachings that we could ever ask for. You know, one of the wonderful things about starting at the end of something is today we have all of God's written message. So we can see the end. We can see where all of this wraps up and goes to. It ends with heaven. It ends with eternal life, the promise of hope that we get through living for Jesus. People back in that day didn't have that. They didn't have everything written down already. They didn't get to read ahead and see how it ended. They were living each of those things in the moment. And they had to truly believe and have faith that that hope was coming. And we still have to do that as well. Just because we can see the end, we have it all written down, we know the story. We still have to believe. We still have to make that choice. But that choice also needs to come with love. Because that's why we have hope. Because Jesus loved us. Are we going to choose to love him back? And are we going to choose to love others? I'm sorry if it kind of became sermonish this morning. That was not my intent. But sometimes it's hard to stay off the soapbox as a preacher, they might say. It's just a wonderful, wonderful book here in John, and I hope that if you haven't taken the time to really dive into it, to go through the book of John in a lot of detail, it's a wonderful written gospel for us to learn from. But I hope that looking at the end of something rather than starting at the beginning maybe gave you a wonderful idea or insight into not only Jesus himself, but into how he expects others to live, how maybe he hopes you will live your life, how you will choose to live your life, how he will connect with you, and how you can connect to his Father through him. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts? I know I haven't given time for that in a little bit.
Going back to your original question.
Yes, sir.
Thinking about the
Oh, yeah.
With that death, it was probably going to make it for Peter to fully understand what he was saying. And how much he loved him.
Yeah.
Because Christ's kingdom could not endure past his death on the cross. But those who were going to pick up and teach him then on did not understand.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to get into that a little bit, answering some of that in my sermon, actually. But I would say just a quick answer I might give to it is look at what happens next. Right after this, when the book of Acts starts, you see Peter tending not to the fishing boat anymore, but he's waiting for the Spirit to come. And he's ready to commit his life. And then you see the day of Pentecost come, and he stands up and he preaches. He's no longer fishing for fish. He's fishing for souls. He's fishing for men. And so maybe that helps as far as him finally getting it after he watched Jesus ascend. Maybe it finally clicked in my mind, oh, maybe this is serious. But yeah, I think that's a great question because that is one of the difficult things. We weren't there. We don't get the dialogue from Peter to say it was at this point that I finally understood or I still did not understand. We don't necessarily get any of that. So we kind of have to take it one way or the other. But it seems based on the fact that after this, not that Peter never made mistakes, but after this moment, starting in the book of Acts and going forward, it seems like Peter did exactly what Jesus asked him to do. Again, not that mistakes weren't made at times. He did get called out by Paul at one point, but he started living his life for Christ rather than going back to the fishing boat, so to speak. Any other comments, questions? All right, I think we are at the time where we would usually stop. So